Hello and welcome to Least Weasel Racing. In the last episode I made a hull for my mini hydro sprint, and in this episode I'm going to be fitting it out. Here I'm marking the transom to be cut out for the strut and the rudder. The way I make my struts is to cut a vertical slit in the transom and then glue in a sheet of carbon fibre, which saves a bit of weight on an actual bracket. So at the top of the picture you can see my digital angle gauge. I just make sure that all my verticals are vertical with that. And I couldn't fit my marker pen through the screw holes on my rudder bracket, so I'm just taking a bit of paint on a piece of wire and dabbing through the screw holes. Then using my Dremel to drill through the dabs of paint. You can see that I use a Kevlar for my transom. Is a piece of Kevlar on each side of a balsa end grain laminate. I would recommend against that, as you saw the Kevlar, when you drill through it or when you cut through it, leaves a very fuzzy edge which is very hard to get rid of. You can cut it off with a razor blade with a lot of trouble. And as you can see, I'm making piles of dust still, even though the build's already finished. So anytime you're building anything, sanding anything, just make sure you wear a dust mask. It's not worth your lungs to not do so. Now I'm gluing in, you can see a bit of the grey glue on the end. That's epoxy mixed with carbon dust and microballoons to thicken it up. That glue's dry now, and I'm trying to install the rudder. I've got a little flex shafted screwdriver which makes it possible to get the screws down the end there. It's still not easy though, and there's quite a lot of faffing around, and still more faffing around that I didn't bother to bore you with, even sped up 75 times. I've applied a little bit of grease to the screws and then glued the carbon plate in, which I'm using to locally reinforce the transom. The screws go through that and through the transom into the rudder bracket, which is threaded. So that's glued the doubler in, and because I greased the threads of the screws, I should be able to get them out at a later date if I ever need to. With the flex driver, you can't put a huge amount of torque on it, so I was finishing off with a normal screwdriver. Now I'm making the engine mount, and I start off with a cardboard template, which is really easy to cut. And when that cardboard template is close, cut around it onto a wooden template, and the wooden template can be sanded to get a much closer finish. So because I made the cardboard one first, the wooden one only takes a little bit of faffing around with to get it to the right shape. I drew up those sheets of motor mounts in I think Adobe Illustrator, and then printed them onto sticker paper, and I can use those to stick onto motor mount templates and cut them out much easier than I would be able to by measuring. Now in my last build I neglected to think of where the wires on the motor would come out, and it made the things difficult. So this time I thought about where the wires needed to come out and drilled my mounting holes vertically. But I wasn't thinking that when the coupling's in, it makes access to the bottom hole almost impossible. So think about where the screw holes for the motor mount are, as well as where the wires come out on the motor. Both are quite important. Now I'll transfer the wooden template onto a sheet of carbon and use a center punch there to punch dimples in the carbon for all the holes that are going to have to be cut into it. And you can see up to the top left of the one I'm doing at the moment, there's a failure. And the reason I did that is I was drilling all the holes out at the same time, and the big center hole encroached onto the big cooling holes. So the second one, I drilled the big center hole whilst the cooling holes were only 2mm, which left it a lot of meat for the center hole to go into, and then drilled the cooling holes out bigger after the center hole was done, and that was a much more stable way of doing it. Again, I'm making lots of dust here, so if you're going to be doing this sort of thing, invest in a decent dust mask. And I also broke a couple of discs doing this, so make sure you've got eye protection. And I think I'm going to be investing in a set of permagrit cutting discs for my Dremel soon, because I broke a couple of these fibre discs during this project. And I've got a couple of diamond cutting discs, but with the speed of the Dremel, the adhesive heats up and lets go. That holds the diamonds onto the metal, so they get less and less effective over time, whereas a permagrit should stay sharp for pretty much ever. I'm just attaching the motor to the motor mount, making sure I can get the motor hatch on there at the angle it's supposed to go in, and cutting the rudder arm down to where it needs to be to clear the strut bracket, and rounding off the end of it. Punching a hole with the automatic center punch and then drilling the hole. I've attached a 2mm ball link, or it's 1.5mm ball link actually, but I've drilled it out to 2mm and drilling out the one for the other end. Now a bit of trial fitting to see where the hole for the stuffing tube is going to be. You can see I've got a small piece of the wire drive in the end of my collet for more accurate alignment, and make sure that I can miss the servo. I've done that before where I've had to put a servo raised up on a block because I've got a stuffing tube going through where the servo should be mounting on the floor. And you can see when I made the motor mount, I made it way offset, so my stuffing tube's sort of going through diagonally. That's intended so I can fit my speed controller next to the motor. So it's a maximum of 450mm long, the hole, to fit rules. So I've got a very limited length of tub to deal with. But it's got to be wide enough for a battery to fit in, so the width isn't a problem elsewhere. I've bent the stuffing tube over my thumbs, and then I do a sort of variable bend in the stuffing tube and then cut out a couple of inches where the bend's right. I might try a couple of sections from different places down that bend to get it so it's not touching the stuffing tube when the motor's installed. Here I'm just mixing up some epoxy with microballoons, loads of microballoons to make a thick paste, like a filler paste, but it's got a decent amount of strength to it. And that's what I use to glue the stuffing tube in, and also to glue the motor mount in. And just a bit of sticky tape on the outside to squish the epoxy microballoon mixture down, make it a nice smooth streamlined shape rather than the shape that it had naturally formed by gravity. Should probably be like a Mr. Whippy ice cream. And measuring the servo push rod for the ball link on the other end. I've added ride plates to the sponsons to make sure they're completely flat. So very thin carbon. It's, I think, 2 thicknesses of carbon. Is about 0.2 of a millimeter thick. And chamfering those to sharp angles and sticking ride plates on the fronts of my sponsons as well. You might have seen in the other video they're in 3 angles. There's the actual ride surface and then 4 ride surfaces for if the weather's really rough, just to throw the front in the air, make sure it doesn't submarine too much. So now the glue's dried and I'm sanding those ride plates that I've just fitted to the front, sanding those flush. And now for the very front ride plates. By the power of editing, that's glue's dry and I'm standing them to shape already. And just some fine sandpaper on the edges now, just to clean up any excess glue. And now final flattening of the ride surfaces and the ride plates. Just always sand ride plates with a block to make sure you're not curving the edges. If you curve any of the edges, the water will ride up it and you get a lot of drag that way. Now the trial fitting of the speed controller, and cut the speed controller to motor wires down, so I haven't got reams of wire sitting there. Then a final little tidy up, just some fine sandpaper on that fillet of the stuffing tube, and see if I can improve the bottom a bit more. It's actually completely untextured, the bottom. And then paint. I'm starting off with a light silver coat as a base to go on. And I found silver covers very well, so you have to put less of it on. Whereas if I just went straight for the other colours, I'd have to put a lot more coats of paint on. It'd get a lot heavier. This is a fluorescent yellow. All the bottom's going to be fluorescent yellow, and the nose and the sponsons. So I've already masked off the booms as well, and now I'm masking off the nose. It's an aesthetic swoopy shape. And mask off the bottom. And I couldn't easily mask off the sponsons with tape, so I'll use a bit of carrier bag, which is quite easy to use. And after this is all masked, I'll be painting it dark green. And it wasn't opaque enough. Even with the darker colour, it was going to take a lot of coats, so I put a coat of silver on it first. And then, thanks to the power of editing, it looks like not many coats, but it's actually quite a few. And then the unmasking. And now there's just a couple of coats of clear lacquer to do to bring out the pearl in the dark green, and we're done. If you've enjoyed this video or the one previously, please subscribe so you don't miss part 3, where I'll be testing the boat and either crying into my hat or jumping for joy. Stay tuned to Least Weasel Racing.